I wanted to revisit this video, not only because it's one of the most significant Gran Turismo videos I've ever produced, but also because I actually am of the opinion that this video, the leaked data mining list from nearly 2 years ago already, June 20th of 2022 no less, actually gives us more of an insight than you might think into the future of Gran Turismo 7. And I don't just mean in the literal way. Obviously it gives us an insight into the vehicles that are coming, but I actually think it gives us an insight, if you think about it, into how the game is going to progress and perhaps the future of GT as a series as a whole. So one of the things I want to do in this video is not so much tick off the ones that we've seen, we will be talking about those as well, but more so looking at the ones that are still to come. I'm going to overlay the video from that original one and you'll be able to actually see some of the ones which have been added. We are way beyond the point of the list having any kind of doubt, of course. Some of the picks were way too specific, like the 32 Ford and the Alphard, so we're way beyond that. And there are roughly 54 vehicles out of that approximately 80 in that original list, which are still to come. Now that's the first thing that I want to talk about, because that means that in just under 2 years we've seen not that much more than a quarter of these vehicles added. And of course part of the reason for that is because of the vastly reduced update size compared to the previous game. I'm going to touch on that point again in a second, so we'll come back to that. And the second thing that I think about that is also because, and this is on the more positive side, because we've seen it peppered in with vehicles which we were not expecting to see. Because I think that the unexpected vehicles, especially much newer stuff, which you usually don't expect Gran Turismo to have in a newer title, stuff like C8 Corvette, Maserati MC20, even something like a Volkswagen IDR, as useless as it is, those I think are really cool, unexpected, and much newer, much later additions that you don't usually expect Polyphony to prioritise. That was great to see, and I'm genuinely happy to see that happen. On the other hand, my theory on why these updates are so small is actually quite simple. It's their version, I believe, of a roadmap, and the idea of Polyphony having a roadmap is so initially laughable because they don't tell us anything. I believe they do have a roadmap though, and part of it includes stretching the updates out longer so that Gran Turismo 7 lasts quote-unquote longer as a game than the previous one did. GT Sport. GT Sport, I believe, had the intended shorter life, so it had the larger updates to get the content out quicker. I don't think there is any element of haphazard chance to how they release stuff. It's very deliberately planned and very deliberately decided. This is going to be this amount of cars, etc, etc. And I think that that is one of the biggest clues for all of us that GT7 is going to last a lot longer. My personal prediction for this game is I think GT7 has at least 2 to 3 more years before we see the next title. Now the caveat to that is, I think we might see some kind of offshoot title in that time, something like a, if the technology advanced, a Taurus Trophy 2 announced. We've talked about that on the channel, where Kaz wants more realistic rigs to have simulation on bikes, etc. But even stuff like some kind of offshoot Gran Turismo game, maybe something that is almost entirely esports focused. Something like that I could see happening, but in terms of just the mainline titles, a Gran Turismo 8, if you will, I think that's at least 2 to 3 years away. And that interestingly ties in to the amount of vehicles that we've seen added, because if you do the calculations, about a quarter of the vehicles, or just over, in a couple of years, well, that would mean that if we continue the same rate that we've already had, you're looking at like 6-8 years more of Gran Turismo 7, which sounds utterly insane in addition to the years that we've already had, but that's not outside the realm of possibility. The problem is, if that is their roadmap, which I wouldn't put it past them, I'm hoping it's not the case, but Gran Turismo 4 to Gran Turismo 5 was quite a while. There's a pretty decent gap between those games, and between many of the Gran Turismo games there were decent gaps. But the difference is I don't think you can really afford to do that anymore, because back then, especially around like the Gran Turismo 3, Gran Turismo 4 era, they were pretty much unrivaled. So many of us, myself included, would jump onto a Need for Speed, Test Drive, Midnight Club, whatever, and enjoy that. But then for the mainline gaming, Gran Turismo was where it was at, and then for some of us we moved over and enjoyed Forza as well, but at that point Forza was still very new and was still finding its feet. It did so very quickly, but Gran Turismo I don't think was really too concerned. These days you have so many other options, from Forza Motorsport to Forza Horizon, to Assetto Corsa to Project Cars, and even to less serious stuff like your Need for Speeds, or The Crew, etc, etc, etc. And there are so many more independent titles, from Rally to Monster Trucks to all other kinds of things. So I just don't think that longer game plan of having a huge gap between games, I just don't think it works anymore. I mean, imagine if Gran Turismo 7 ended up having 6 to 8 more years, with a total lifespan of 8+ years between games. That would literally mean there are people who are age 12 when the game came out, who are like finishing college or in college when the next title comes out, and even though they might still be interested, many of them probably won't. They'll have moved on. And the unfortunate thing to me is that the game doesn't have that standing long-term factor that games like 2, 3 and 4 had, and even 5 and 1 for some people probably as well, wherein there was so much to do within the game at its core without any updates, that you can genuinely go back and spend weeks playing career mode if you wanted to. Whereas in GT7, some people have said, oh, it's taken them, such and such amount of time to do all of the events or complete all of this or all of that. Sure, you can make it last longer if you want to, but I remember when GT7 came out, the idea of a Gran Turismo 7 game, if you'd have said to me that there would be a Gran Turismo release title where you could complete pretty much all of the career mode in 2 to 3 days, that would have been ridiculous. I remember when Forza Horizon 1 came out, and that really annoyed me, that you could do it that quickly. If you'd have said it about Gran Turismo, I'd have said that was impossible. And here we are. That's exactly what it was like when it came out. And even with all of the expansion since, you're talking what, like a week or 2 tops? That's kind of insane for a mainline Gran Turismo title, and even with Sport, of course famously having no career mode at launch, but even then you could say, well, it's a different kind of game. Even if you want to excuse it, the fact remains it doesn't have the replayability, especially now with the servers gone. The reason why I wanted to talk about this more though is because I think this boils down to really 3 primary options moving forward, and this is what I'm talking about when it comes to predicting the future of Gran Turismo based on this knowledge. Yes, we know the vehicles, but also, do we? Because not only are there some vehicles which, as I said, have been additions on top of this list, which of course is the unknown quantity, but also I think there's something interesting in terms of the list itself. I've said this a number of times, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure why some people seem to have this response. They misunderstood, or maybe I explained something in a way that was difficult to understand. I made a couple of videos not too far back about cars which I predicted could come to the game, like premium updates or brand new vehicles, or some of the cars that were teased maybe within the game in like the trailers in the different manufacturer shops. And some of those have kind of come true if you look at the ones more recently. What I said that people seem to have taken out of context is that I think some of the cars would be held back for the next title. And for some weird reason people took that as me intimating that Gran Turismo 8 was going to come out next week. That's not what I said at all. I didn't even intimate that. What I said was, I think that they'll be held back for the next game. And that's that. I didn't predict when the next game was going to be. Now maybe people wrongly assumed that I was meaning that, well, if they're going to hold them back, it must mean that the next title's coming soon. Well, no, I'm sorry, I didn't put that positive spin on it at all. Because not only do I think they're going to hold some of them back, I think you're going to be waiting a whole long time for it as well. There is no good spin on that. And that is actually where my theory falls on this. I think that even a couple of years from now, if we continue the same kind of release schedule which we're currently having of like 3-4 cars here and there, with a mix of Vision GTs, some new unannounced ones, and some from the list, well, even at that point, a couple of years from right now, that's still only another 20-30 cars added out of this master list, which still contains about 54 cars. With that in mind, it really only leads to 3 possible options that I can think of. One is we see a drastic increase in the volume and frequency of updates. I think you know as well as I do how likely that option is. Option number 2 is we see what I said about a 6 to 8 year game plan of releasing the same amount until the list is genuinely completely done. I also don't find that too likely. It's possible, but who's even going to still be playing the game at that point? And that actually touches on a point which I think is the kind of shooting yourself in the foot aspect of the esports side, because if you have a game which is simultaneously trying to appeal to the esports side and to people who want the traditional experience, well then you've got the problem of the esports almost exclusively uses race cars, but then you barely add any race cars in updates. You add road cars in updates for the general players, but then there are so few events which need new road cars that it's kind of this catch-22 where nobody is completely happy. You're trying to please both people, but you're not really doing it right on either side, even though you very easily could. I know it seems like an oversimplification to say that, especially from an outsider perspective, But let's be honest, it really isn't complicated. If you're making a game for esports, add the cars that those people are using. And if you're making a game for the normal players, give them a career mode that's worth using normal cars in. It really isn't rocket science. Trying to do both but getting somehow both of them wrong is a very fine art, and somehow they're managing to do it. They've been doing it for 2 games now, you could argue. That brings me to my theory, and you're not going to like this one either, that's exactly what they're going to do. Hold back cars. And there is a clear precedent for it. See, back in the day, in like GT2, 3, 4, many of us didn't know how to do stuff like data mining. In fact, in many cases, we were kids, and people just didn't really do that back then. I mean, look how relatively recently it was that people discovered there were cheat codes in Gran Turismo 4. Look how long it took for them to find that. These days, people find stuff way more quickly. Look how relatively soon after the game's release, this data mining was, back in 2022. It doesn't take anywhere near as long for stuff like that to get leaked now, or to be found, or whatever else. So with that in mind, it is not at all new to have vehicles that are held over to the next game. In fact, I've mentioned it a number of times, and I'll probably do it again in future because it's a prime example. Gran Turismo 6. We saw relatively late, I believe it was, into the GT6 life cycle, the Bugatti and Hyundai Vision GTs teased in GT6. They never arrived in that game. They were kept and held back for GT Sport. Likewise in GT Sport, I seem to recall a similar thing happened with a couple of vehicles that were not arriving in that game. I think maybe even the Lamborghini Vision GT might have been one of them. And for some weird reason, I seem to recall them showcasing the Lamborghini with a cockpit cam on Monaco, I think it was. And then also, even more weird, it's like they're trying to tell us something. I seem to recall back in Gran Turismo 6, they showcased at least the Hyundai Vision GT, if not the Bugatti as well, on the Monaco circuit. That's a hell of a lot of Monaco being shown for not having it in either Sport or 7. So that's kind of a weird through line there on a side tangent. But my point is, seeing cars even in a game is not a guarantee anymore that you're going to have it in the game. And even though that's not new, as I said, there are plenty of like leftover code and things that have been found from older games where they were cut, licensing, whatever else, the old Lotus situation. But I think that what that means moving forward is, let's say we jump forward a couple of years, we've seen about 20 or 30 more of these cars. Well, that leaves a good 20 or 30 still on the list, which are not in the game. So what's going to happen to those? Well, I don't think they're going to stretch the game out necessarily longer and longer and longer just for the sake of getting MX-5s and a few Evos in. So what I think they're going to do is take those, say, 20, 30, maybe even 40 semi-completed, if not completed vehicles. They may already even be completed right now for all we know, and keep them as day one vehicles, as I like to call them, in the next title. Because then you have this false effect of booting up the new game or seeing the trailers and seeing these cars that, oh, I remember that was supposed to come in the last game. Now I can see the Evo 9 driving around Red Rock Valley or whatever in the trailer for Gran Turismo 8, and suddenly my nostalgia member berries are triggered and it makes me want to buy the game again, even though not a week ago I was saying that, I don't even know about this anymore. That's the effect of marketing, but also that's the effect of holding things back. So if you approve of that or not, if you like that or not, I think that's probably what's going to happen. I could be completely wrong, and we may get all 54 of these vehicles in the next year. But I think we all know that that's probably not likely. And I think that, at least based on the information that we currently have and my own musings on it, that's what I could see the roadmap being. At least 2 or 3 more years of GT7, with probably another 30 or so vehicles out of the list added, and then I believe the ones that are left over, which many of them you can see in this video, and I'm sure you could pick out a few which are less likely to arrive sooner than later, maybe stuff like, you know, certain MX-5s or certain Evos, or maybe something like a Renault Aventime or whatever else. They could arrive, but I could see some of those being held back for the next title. And I guess to briefly run through the list of what those 54 actually are, and even a couple of these are definitely still up in the air because of licensing, they are the Peugeot 205 Pikes Peak, the Ferrari 430 Scuderia, the 599, the Renault 5 Turbo, the Ari Amamiya GT300 RX7, the ASL Garaya GT300, the Renault Aventime, which I mentioned, the Mazda Autozam AZ1, the Buick GNX, Castrol NSX, the Super GT 500 car, the classic 1600 GT Celica, the Chevy Chevelle, the 1993 Civic SIR2, the Fiat Coupe Turbo Plus, the Roof Yellowbird, the 1992 shape Lancia WRC Delta rally car, the Eagle, either closed-top or open-top E-Type Speedster, the 2011 and 1996 Lotus Elises, and these are the ones which I think could run into licensing issues, as we've seen and discussed before about Lotus, the 2002 Esprit, the 72 Europa, a couple of racing versions of the Evora, a GT3M, GT4M, I mentioned back in the older video, I think those could be Group 3 and Group 4. The Mark V Golf GTI, the 2010 Subaru WRX Sedan, the 1999 Subaru. I seem to recall, don't we actually have that one now? I think that might have been added to the game already. Sometimes I'll lose track of Subarus, to be honest, in terms of adding them. Of course, we have the 04 Subaru STI added, but that one, as I mentioned in the video, was listed twice for some weird reason, like two different variations, maybe like a WRX and a Spec C, so I don't know. We have at least one of those, though. The BMW E60 M5, the 1998 shape MX-5, the 2002 Audi RS6 Avant, 2003 BMW Z4, a re-debut, if you will, for Caterham, a 2012 shape Caterham R500, a classic C2 Corvette from the early 60s, the Lancia S4 Delta rally car, of course, the Monster, the classic version of the DeLorean, one which I always found a very odd choice when we've already got one in the game, the LP560 Gallardo from Lamborghini, the 2007, so the earliest R35 shape GTR, the Evo 8 and the Evo 9 from Mitsubishi, the S1 variant of the Audi Quattro, the Audi R8 V10 Plus, very obvious choice, road-going version of the race car, another Lancia rally car, they're getting a lot of love in these lists, the 037 Evo 2 Rally, the Roof RGT from 2016, the Mazda MX-5 RF, possibly the Targa Top. We have seen, obviously, the more track-focused MX-5 added, so it could be maybe that one was changed on the list, or it could still be a separate vehicle. The 2007 MX-5 as well, the 1991 RX-7 Type R, 2009 Audi TTS, the vintage Bugatti Type 37A, that's probably the one out of the whole list which I'm actually the most interested in seeing because it's so different, the Volvo V40, BMW 2002 Turbo and the 2002 Tii, the Mercedes 500e from 1991, the Ferrari 812 Superfast, I'm sure plenty of people would love to see that one, and last but not least, the 1993 shape Porsche 911 Turbo S. So those are the 54 out of the total roughly 80 to begin with, which are still due to arrive. So one thing again which I'll kind of praise Polyphony for, as many critiques as I have, in addition to my praise earlier on for adding vehicles which we weren't expecting but were also really cool, like the Maserati MC20, this is another way in which I'll praise them, and that is out of the 80, if you look at the ones which have been added so far, I think they've done a pretty damn good job of prioritising the ones first, which would be the most high profile. So if you remember the total list, and you'll have seen some of them here, the Lexus LFA, the Jag XJ220, the Bugatti Chiron, the Mercedes 190e. I think they did a damn good job of having those really, really popular picks getting in there first, with a couple of exceptions here and there, obviously, but the fact that those have already been ticked off the list, I think is pretty good. You know, if we got somewhere down the line 3 years from now and the Chiron still wasn't in, or the XJ220 still wasn't in, it wouldn't look that great, but the fact that they are showing some effort in prioritising the probably most requested ones, I think that's a good sign. And if you carry that logic forward over perhaps 2024, for example, I would say that it could be a good sign that for those of us who have been clamouring for stuff like an Evo 9, or the Renault 5 rally car, or the Lancia S4, or the 037, maybe even like the Peugeot 208 Pikes Peak, which I've been talking about for years in terms of coming to the game, I think as far back as Gran Turismo 6 maybe, but never has yet. These kind of ones I think probably have a higher priority scale on this list moving forward. And I think that moving forward, like I said earlier on, the ones that are lower and lower on the list in terms of probability are probably going to end up in the next title. Either that, or we've got a hell of a long stretch of Gran Turismo 7 still to come, with a couple of cars every month for about 6 to 8 years. I really don't think that would be a smart business move, but this is Polyphony we're talking about, so you never know. And on top of all of this, this doesn't even touch on circuits. We already know there are circuits due to be added, a good, 3 or 4 of them. Without circuits, a lot of people are getting bored much more quickly, and it's been a while since we saw like a really significant circuit. Lake Louise was cool, but aside from that, I mean, name the last one that we had that was really good, and think about how long ago that was. Stuff like your Silverstones, Red Rocks, various others too, Villeneuve. Even these tracks here and there would attract a lot more attention. And on that point, I do believe that that is being, to some degree, weaponized as well. Because although we're waiting and waiting and waiting for tracks and getting more and more annoyed, it means that when they finally do release one, it seems like a bigger deal. Even though it really isn't. Because again, look back to GT Sport and how frequently we were getting big deal circuits back then. Compare that to now. I really don't like their method of trying to stretch this game artificially. And I think I've even mentioned this before, maybe even a long time ago, and I know some of you agree because I've seen this sentiment in the comments. I would fully say, take whatever you're going to do with GT7 over the 4, 5, 6 years. Give us everything that is complete. If there's anything that's not quite ready, you know, like Sophie AI or whatever, that's fine. Release that when it's ready, as you know, as they already are. But every single car, every single circuit that's ready to go, put it in the game from launch. Do not stretch it out. Then, if you want to try and stretch the game, give us large, paid-for DLC updates. Because at least for myself, and I know for a fact some of you because you've said similar things, I don't mind paying for DLC if it feels like a genuine addition. Because I would go so far as to say, if GT7 at release had everything that it has right now, even with no more additional content, I think that would have been a much better release game. The career would have been much larger, the circuits would have been more so, way more vehicles, way more to do, far more polished, and I think that would have been a fantastic day one release. Most of the issues that I have with the game is because it's being dragged out so much, not because the content is bad, and I think that's such a shame because it is literally, and you can watch this happening in real time, it's souring us on good content. So you've got stuff which we would otherwise love being tainted by how badly it's being released. Imagine if all of this stuff was in the game from day one, or at least all of it which was ready, how much cooler of an impression that would have been, how much more enjoyable of a game it would have been, and how many would still be loving the game than still do. So I would fully endorse having all of that as much as possible in the game from day one, and then have some kind of big expansion, or even multiple expansions, later. Charge us a tenner for it, charge us 15, 20, I would pay it if that gives you like 30, 40, 50 new cars at once they're all ready to go, maybe like 5 new circuits and a ton of new events. As far as I'm concerned, that would be a good value DLC. Way more valuable than just paying for credits, or paying for like getting vehicles quicker than anyone else instead of grinding for it, or having this artificially stretched out system that they use now. But at least that's my take on it. So of course let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you next time. But for now, thanks for watching.